So I'm going to be talking about this idea of the architect and the client, how this relationship can lead to pretty amazing buildings that you're going to see. I'll be talking about 6 different architects. The top 4 you can see are cases in which I think the relationship works and the architect really listens to the client. The bottom 2, the Mies van der Rohe and the Peter Eisenman, are cases in which the architect sort of went on his own way. And the buildings are still phenomenal, but the relationship kind of fell apart and it's challenging. And I start with Frank Lloyd Wright. I know a lot of you are huge fans of Frank Lloyd Wright, and maybe you've been to see Falling Water. This is also the earliest building that I want to talk about. I could have chosen any example by Frank Lloyd Wright because he always had unusual relationships with his clients. He chose clients for their eccentricities and their interest in the field, and he wouldn't work for just anybody. In this case, it's early in his career, and he is a member of this Unity Church in Chicago in Oak Park. The church burned down in 1905, and he became the designer of the next church. The congregation had a couple of needs, among many. One is they wanted an affordable building. They only had about $45,000, and back then, a public building of this scale would have been at least $60,000. So his solution to that problem was to work with concrete. Highly unusual. This is something we associate with industrial architecture, but Frank Lloyd Wright thought he could save some money and also create something aesthetically interesting and modern. Now, the other major concern is that he needed to create a building that would be in itself sort of modern and interesting and different, like the Unitarian faith. And that sounded funny. Different, but we all know. If you've ever heard Garrison Keillor making fun of Unitarians, right? Unitarians are a different approach to religion than the traditional Protestant or Catholic faith. And as a result, they needed a building that would represent their special needs and their worship services. So they hired Frank Lloyd Wright. It was very logical because he was a member of this church and he understood their needs. A couple of people influenced him in this design. One would be his uncle, Reverend Jenkins Lloyd Jones, on his mother's side of the family. He was himself a Unitarian missionary, spreading the word in the Midwest all the way out to California. He was in charge of the Western Unitarian Conference. He was quite the liberal, and he was pushing Unitarians to move further away from the Christian focus. So for its time, highly unusual. He co-founded All Souls Church in Chicago, which the next year, they added to that this community center, the Abraham Lincoln Center. And what's important here is that Jenkins Lloyd Jones was interested in providing for a particular group of people, lower income, minority, a black population. His belief is that this is our job as Unitarians to go out into the world and to help this type of person, particularly the lower classes. So Jenkins Lloyd Jones, he had opinions about architecture as well, what church architecture should look like. And he said about it, flood it with sunlight and fill it with pure air. Let architects give us buildings so simple and earnest and ethical that they will present no external excrescence. I'm saying that word correctly. So Jenkins Lloyd Jones was a missionary, he was a Unitarian, he was the leader of this organization in Chicago, but he also had strong opinions about the role of church architecture in meeting the needs of the congregation. So in addition to Frank Lloyd Wright's uncle, we also have the minister of Unitarian Church there in Oak Park, Reverend Rodney Johono. In 1893, he became the minister at the Oak Park Unity Church that had been burned down. He was even more liberal than Jenkins Lloyd Jones, and they both respected one another. He felt that a church should embody the principles of liberal religion. And of course, the Unitarians tout that. They are proud of the fact that they were a tolerant and welcoming faith. So we needed a church, he said, that would recognize the principles of liberal religion for which this church stands. Unity, truth, beauty, simplicity, freedom, and reason. So that's what the minister of the church is shooting for. He's working on the committees, he's working with Frank Lloyd Wright and really pushing to have a church that would reflect the values of this faith. And the result is this fascinating concrete building on Lake Avenue in Oak Park. It is not like any church you've ever seen before. They've recently renovated it at great expense, and it's gorgeous right now. It has a sort of boxy appearance. It's sort of simplified, monumental. You can even talk about the fact that it has perhaps the influence of Mayan architecture. Oh, a little plug for Chris Housen's brother. It's also been described as related to Japanese architecture, and we know Frank Lloyd Wright was interested in both types of architecture. So some of the motifs here are sort of geometric patterns that might relate to motifs coming from different cultures. And even the minister of the church understood what he was doing here. He said the past and the present forms of religion are thus brought together in a spirit of unity. So not afraid to embrace non-Western cultures or ancient cultures to come up with a design for a new modern building to meet the needs of this liberal faith. This is also described, someone said that this spirit of unity is captured in the fact that it's poured concrete. So the entire building is poured concrete, which unifies it, if you will. And that's a reflection of the faith as unified. So what's missing? If this is a church, what do we expect to find on a church? A cross. Well, no crosses, that's for sure. Unitarians don't go into churches. No steeple, which is what we traditionally associate with churches. So we have a Catholic church here with a very prominent tower or steeple, and a more slender version with the Protestant church you see. And then you have this very strange, squat, cubic, massive building, however you want to describe it. Even today, when you're driving down the street, this building stands out. It is strange and exciting, both. Reverend Johanno said one of the reasons we want to get away from that steeple, he said, God should not be sought in the sky, but on earth, among the children of men. So he's pushing for this notion of getting away from this sort of mystical experience one has with God in other faiths, and instead bringing it down to the realm in which we live, where God is amongst us. This building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright really kind of reflects that sort of attitude toward their relationship to God and to one another. So the dates. These are two churches located in Oak Park. You know this one is from the early 1900s, 1905. The one on the left, anybody want to guess as to when that was built? 1990? I have no idea what you're saying, but I'm sure you're very smart. You all get it. This is from 1917. And it's directly across the street from Unity Temple. So I always imagine these poor people come out of their church every Sunday and they look across the street and they see this very strange building with all these tourists in front of it, and they're like, what did we do wrong? You know, but they're directly across the street, and it just goes to show how radical this design was. We have a radical congregation, and they needed a radical building. So this is the First United Church of Oak Park. Nothing against this. It's a beautiful church. We've got our typical gabled roof. We've got a tower of sorts. We have a very clear front entrance right in the center of the building that welcomes you. Frank Lloyd Wright's not going to give us any of that. And that's partly because of the location. We're on a corner lot that's very narrow. Lake Street is here, and it's a very busy street. So he's got to accomplish a lot in a narrow property. Instead of putting the front door here, which would make a lot of sense on the main drag, you have to come around the corner and enter through here. And that's part of how he designed it to cause you to have some sort of experience as you approach the building. You're going to enter into this center area. The larger area is the sanctuary for worship. The smaller area is sort of like the meeting house for social events. There's a kitchen in there. And here you can see from the plan how we approach Frank Lloyd Wright buildings is very important. He uses this in many of his buildings, including falling water. You enter through this sort of circuitous route, and then often he'll place you in a small chamber before you walk out into something that just moves beyond. So this is this procession from Lake Street all the way around. And somebody counted up the number of times you make a right angle. I mean, you do your turn, and you turn, you go 3 stairs, and you turn, you go 3 more, and you turn. You enter into this area, turn left, turn left, turn left, and then you look out and you see this phenomenal space. So here we are on the outside. It's a fairly insignificant entranceway. It's tucked away, and that's something you find at the Roby House in Chicago. You find it at Falling Water as well. It's not like this giant door beckoning you to come in. Instead, you have to make this journey to get to that point, and then voila, suddenly you're in that space for the worship of God and the service of man. We enter here, turn left, turn left, turn left, and then we are in this area here. So it's low ceilings, and then suddenly you can look all the way up to the glass in the ceiling. It holds 450 people, which is a sizable number, but no pew could be more than 40 feet from the pulpit. So we have 3 sides of seating, and it's as if you could look down and talk to your neighbor. There's an attempt to create create a space that is warm and welcoming, like the faith itself, right? There's a tolerant, welcoming congregation that does not have a hierarchy with the bishop and the priest down to the people. It's more of a horizontal organization, more egalitarian, and so that space needs to reflect that. The speaker, he says, the speaker is placed well out in the auditorium. His audience gathered around him in the fashion of a friendly gathering. So no intimidation here. It's meant to be something that feels warm and, as he says, friendly. And here, we were able to attend services this summer when we visited the Unity Temple, and you can see, of course, afterwards, this is a Unitarian church, right? You hang around, this is a church in general, all churches are like this. But you stand around and you chat with your neighbors. The space itself kind of pushes you into that relationship, though. You seem to be comfortable with your neighbors. If you compare it to the experience of, say, a Catholic church, where you are often seated far away from the priest would be up several stairs and an altar, and there's something mystical about that experience. It's just a very different experience of church. Whereas here with Unity Temple, you're meant to feel like you are valued in a way, and you are part of this congregation. So he created a space that would actually meet the needs of the faith to have this gathering quality. Here we are at the front, at the pulpit. This is the view that the minister would have looking out, and you can see, again, people are to your right, to your left, and in front of you, but nobody is too far away. And we look up into that beautiful light. In terms of the design aesthetic, also, this is quite different. It's not churchy, if you will. Here we have Gothic Revival, steeply pointed arches, lots of color, stained glass. If you can look, there are some examples of sculpture and paintings. It's very busy, very exciting, very mystical. In contrast, Unity Temple is sort of rational and lacking in all of that fussy decorative details. Lots of geometric shapes, cubes and circles here. This is his design aesthetic at this point in his career, for much of his career for that matter. Just a very different experience. I took this picture to show you how he has applied the concrete. Even though we're working with a material that's very much associated with an industry, he's trying to use it for sort of decorative effects, and you can see different patterns that he uses in different areas. But no paintings, no sculpture. There is no decoration beyond what we see here, the wood and the concrete. As we go upward, we have the glass that brings light into the space, and I should mention, there are no windows until we get to the very top of the clear story. This is a busy street. He wanted it to feel warm and quiet, and it truly is. There's sort of this warm quality to it. And that's partly because there are no windows at the lower level, and the light comes from above. Although I will mention, they had air conditioning put in finally because they couldn't have services in the summer. They were just so hot. Only one window on each side opens, but it apparently was pretty miserable. And as we look upward, beautiful amber-tinted glass in a geometric pattern, much like what we saw below with the woodwork. Again, coming back to what the minister was seeking, he said he wanted a church that would embody the principles of liberal religion for which this church stands. Unity, truth, beauty, simplicity, freedom, and reason. And frankly, Wright himself said, Unity Temple is my contribution to modern architecture. He saw this as a huge accomplishment. He realized when he completed this that he had, in a sense, arrived, if you will. He's contributed something to modern architecture that is new and exciting. This building would be part of a portfolio that was published in 1910 in Europe. I think it was in Germany, the Wasserman portfolio, in which drawings of Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings were published and circulated throughout Europe, and it would have a huge impact on European modernism, the development of European modernism. Unity Temple played an important role and would help to shape some of the architects that are famous for developing a style we call international style, including this architect, Harry Rietveld. So I turn now to the Netherlands. With the client, in this case, is not a congregation, but instead a single woman a widow who has hired this man, Herk Rietveld, to create a house for her that was quite unique. Rietveld's a part of what we call the Gestalt movement. Plasticism, there's a lot of theory behind it. You probably are familiar with Mondrian's paintings where he reduced the palette to just primary colors of black and white. There was a belief that if we could have harmony in our surroundings, from paintings to architecture to furniture, if we could be surrounded by a certain aesthetic, that we would have more harmony in our lives. And Rietveld is a part of this movement. But at this point, he's never built anything. He's a furniture designer. Trude Schroeder met him when he and his father were delivering furniture. His father was also a furniture maker. Her husband had a certain old-fashioned taste. He liked heavy, dark wood. And she and Rietveld struck up a conversation. She complained that she really didn't like this furniture, but Then her husband died, and she was able to then build a house in her style, which is much more radical and progressive. The husband's gone, now we can have some fun. And she picked Rietveld because she knew that he understood this idea of very much more a modern approach. Schroeder's really fascinating. In this case, the client has a firm sense of what it is she wants. She's a widow, and she has 3 children. She's very wealthy. Some would describe her as a socialite, but she wants to create a house that would allow her to be very close to her children in a way that most women of her stature in society would not. They would have nannies raising the children. Trude Schroeder wanted a house where her children would be close to her and they could share as they grew up. This was highly unusual, and Rietveld understood what it is she wanted. So we have a specific client with specific needs here, and the result is this fabulous house that looks so modern, even though it's from the 1920s. But when you compare it to the buildings next to it, it still stands out as a very exciting, I gotta say exciting, strange, some I might say, but very exciting house that looks very much like a Mondrian painting in 3 dimensions. So we have the same primary colors, blue, red, yellow, with the accents of black and white and gray. We have floating planes, as if you've taken that Mondrian painting and brought it to life. It's a very functional building. She wanted a practical space for her family, and so he added a lot of details here, such as the little speaking tube. She liked to sit up here in the dining room on the 2nd floor, and so she could communicate with people outside. She could just speak through this little tube. Or here, he designed a place for the delivery of groceries here. The window slides open and you can see inside to a shelf built just for that purpose. Here we are now in the kitchen, and there's that little shelf. So there are all kinds of things about this house when you take the tour. It's just one thing after another where he's created some ingenious solution to the problem of how to live in a sort of modest house. He designed the furniture, as you can see. Very simple. I don't know that they're very comfortable, but simple plywood, clean lines. Now, she had certain desires for her bedrooms upstairs. There are 3 bedrooms. The girls, 2 girls shared a bedroom here. A boy has a bedroom there, and then we'll see in a moment. She had her own very small, very modest bedroom. But she wanted beds to be fit so that they could be fit in 2 different positions. She wanted each bedroom to have a direct water supply and a drain, so you could wash yourself. She also wanted each of the bedrooms to have access to the outside, so they each have a little balcony for fresh air. Other things that we find in this house. Water pipes that are designed to run underneath the shoe rack to keep your shoes warm. This is really ingenious. Tables that fold out, so that if you need more space, you can put them away. He even used black rectangles around door handles and light switches because, of course, grimy hands are going to translate black. So he's very sophisticated and having a good time, I think. Notably, he used stucco over brick. It was cheaper than using concrete, but there was a desire to create the look of concrete here. So it's kind of like fake concrete. It's not concrete. But he, like Frank Lloyd Wright, is interested in modern materials. I think for some reason it was cheaper for him to just create the look. These windows are phenomenal, though. As you can see, this is the corner of the room where Schroeder would sit in this, what's called the Berlin chair, designed by Rietveld. She would sit here and look out on what was once a very wooded area at the very edge of Utrecht. It is now, unfortunately, a highway beside the building, but there's still enough vegetation to cover it. But you can see the windows completely open as if you are outside. And, very unique system here. So take a look at this plan. This is where it really comes to life, where you start to realize what an interesting building it is. On the second floor, which is the living area, I've got kitchens downstairs and a workroom, but what we want to talk about is the second floor. Here's one of the bedrooms for the son, the daughters in that bedroom, and a little bitty area back here for True Shredder, a little tiny twin bed. But you'll notice these black lines here. This is how the rooms could be divided if you wanted privacy. But by day, the doors were meant to be slid back so we would have an open space where we could share. This phenomenal picture shows you how we've carried through the colors of the exterior, like a Mondrian painting, into the interior. And we're looking at the girls' bedroom with the 2 beds. We've got that access to the outside here. This is, I believe, a mock-up of the room, but it works. And this is a tiny little room for Mrs. Schroeder herself, the dining area here, and then the son's on the other side.
How was this received?
It was considered strange, but greatly admired by architects. So look at the tracks in the ceiling, and the walls are sliding. And they'll do this for you if you go on the tour. And here we go from the enclosed room of the girls, open to the boys' room, and now we're kind of melting away as we take these walls away. And then finally, this is access to the mother's bathroom and bedroom, and that's the dining room in the back. I will mention that the kids said, apparently the children, they were a bit embarrassed by this house and they didn't want people to know they lived there. Yeah, kids are, it's like whatever your parents like, you can't like. But later, of course, they understood how amazing the house was to grow up in. They had memories of the fact that their mother had trained them to always jump over the white. So, I mean, all this great design stuff, and like the reality is, don't get your shoes on like white. But they have great memories of living in this very strange and wonderful house. Here's that little speaking tube. So I guess she'd go over and kind of yell down this tube. And all kinds of built-ins here for practicality. This is a famous chair designed by Wright. Gave him a lot of fame. The fact that we have just simply 2 planes of wood, and they're all painted again with the primary colors. It is a phenomenal house, and oddly, it was only designed to last 50 years, so the materials are affordable, plywood. But here it is still going strong almost 100 years later, and you have to wear little booties, if I remember correctly, right? And walk, but they show you everything. They pull everything out, and I keep thinking, don't do it, it's gonna break. But I'm so fortunate to have been able to see how this works, how these all slide up together. Here's the chair, the Berlin chair that he designed that she sat in most of her time, which again, I don't think I'd want to sit in that chair, but it's an elegant design. It's honest and pure. And the table designed by Wright.
What's the square footage of the house? Approximately?
Less than 2,000 square feet, I would think. It's modest. Yeah, I would say more like 1,500,
Wow.
if that. And the downstairs is actually interesting too. I didn't mention this area, this glassed in, it can be glassed in or it can be closed off in the winter. And up above there's a beautiful skylight, so light's coming down through that. Everything is well thought out and very crafty. This is a photograph of True Schroeder. That's that area that she loved to stay, looking before they built the highway. And here she is again from an older photograph. She lived here for more than 60 years. So that tells you how much she appreciated the house, and it worked for her, apparently. Here she is. The side story is that they fell in love, and he was married and he had children. Yeah, but not a no. They managed, when his wife died, he moved in with her, and I think the children were not very happy about this relationship, but they had a kindred spirits, and they together designed other examples of architecture and furniture. So this is like a match made in heaven, where the architect and the client really understand each other and listen to each other, and the results are pretty phenomenal. So let's turn now to something completely different. We've been talking about a church and a private home, and now we're going to talk about a hospital in Finland. A hospital is designed for tuberculosis patients. Hajo, Finland. Symptoms, first of all, of TB. We're going to understand the needs of the client. Symptoms of TB include pain with breathing and coughing up blood, fatigue, fever, chills. How did they treat TB in the 20s? It sure is. It's really not much to do. Fresh air, rest, and fresh air. So this hospital is located in a very rural area. Of course, we're in Finland, the nation of forests. They would wheel these beds out onto this landing, this porch that he designed. It's wide enough, of course, for these beds, and they could simply sit under blankets in the fresh air and relax. Here, surrounded by trees and fresh air. That is the process of healing at this point in time, the 20s. The average stay lasted several years, so Aalto had to come up with a plan that would feel more like home and address all sorts of needs, including communal spaces, staff housing, a chapel, and walkways in the forest itself, if you were able to get out. He became very famous as a 30-year-old. This was a breakthrough building. You can see he gained international fame for this building. And it's associated with what we call the international style of modern architecture. Some of the features that you associate with that would be overall sleek, modern, pared down, simplified, clean, white. Again, the use of concrete, we keep finding that with these modern buildings. And the emphasis upon horizontality rather than verticality. So lots of what we call ribbon windows, these long extended areas of glass. Sometimes he would include, Aalto would include these swoopy lines as well. But this building is more than just about a style, a look. He's really trying to understand the needs of people who live here. That's how he always designed. He said a softening human touch is needed to mold societies, cities, buildings, and even the smallest machine-made objects into something positive for the human psyche. So Aalto is different from other international style modern architects in Europe in this period in that he's really paying attention to human needs. That human touch is what he's interested in all of his buildings. It sets him apart. He actually called this building a medical instrument. The fact that the hospital itself as a building could help in the process of healing, or at least making the patients comfortable. So, for example, he uses vibrant colors in public areas to brighten your day, to bring joy. And here, this bright, light-filled lobby. Initially, not in my photograph, this was later they added this, but initially there were pigeonholes for the slippers of patients so that you kind of felt like you were home. You're going to live here for years at a time, so why not make it feel more like a home than what we associate with hospitals as being very sterile. What's sterile, of course. Now the patient rooms, I have a student who trekked to this. I don't even know, she hitchhiked or something and got herself to this hospital. And there is one room dedicated as a museum where they kept all the original pieces, which is fascinating. He's created a room that would be soothing in a variety of ways. First of all, very quiet colors, soft greens, soft blues. The ceiling is painted darker so that we don't have the glare of light coming down and hitting the patients in the eyes, because of course they're very sensitive to light. Light sources are kept out of sight for the patients lying in bed, so they're going to be up above their heads rather than directly in front of them. Heating and ventilation. We don't want to be exposed to strong temperature changes. So he's going to tuck away the heating elements and prevent the room from having draft. And then finally, of course, we need access to fresh air at all times. That was part of what they thought the healing process involved. So you'll notice quiet, soft colors, a light fixture that is projecting the light upward and then creating a sort of a soft glow. He designed wash basins, and of course each patient in the room had a separate wash basin for hygienic reasons. He designed this sink. It's both successful and a failure at the same time. Can you guess how it's a failure?
Flashing.
Yeah, you look at this and you know it's going to go flying. But the good part is that the sound is kept down. You don't have that loud ping, ping on metal. So he designed it for that purpose alone. I guess he wasn't concerned about the splashing, but he was more concerned about irritating. They're very sensitive when they have this disease. He's created these very slender but functional, I don't know if you call them closets, because they're very narrow, but he uses bentwood to create that. And you can see they are raised up above the floor so that you can mop easily beneath them. The floors are made of linoleum, which again adds to easy cleaning. Heating elements are hidden inside a concrete bench here, so there's no direct blowing heat, or you're not going to expose yourself to a hot radiator. And then we have ventilation, different configurations of the windows being open. Maybe you call this a health window, part of that process of healing. If you went to the dining area, the shades were retractable so that if there's harsh sunlight, you don't have a glare in your eyes. He also included plantings here to soften the room and create a more healthy environment. Here you can see those awnings are pulled back to allow more light. Now what's also interesting, he designed every aspect of this hospital, including this chair. They call it Painio chair because of this location in Painio, Finland. The chair looks very similar to other examples of modern chairs from the 1920s. In fact, he owned an example of that, a Marcel Breuer, called the Bosley Chair after Bosley Kandinsky. Very similar, and yet this one is geared towards a patient who's suffering from tuberculosis. What makes this one better than that one? Because they're both very modern. In fact, I'm wearing a Painio chair pin that Maureen gave me.
Expansion of the chest.
Yes, so how do we, okay, so you're able to lean back, which helps you to breathe. How else is this a good opportunity for?
The headrest.
It's a softer place to, whoever said that, to place the head. What else?
Nothing sharp.
Nothing sharp, very smooth. What is that? We had, when I was in grad school and I was pregnant, we had chairs like this in our department because you got to have artsy chairs in our department, right? And I'm down in the chairs and it occurs to me, I'm not getting out of this chair. How about the wood versus the chrome?
Yeah, cleanable.
Well, the chrome is more cleanable, but the chrome is also reflective. So again, light sensitivities. And the chair would be warm and it wouldn't, but it would not heat up. It's warmer than a metal, but at the same time, it's not going to heat up in the way that a metal does, because you don't want the body temperature to be annoying. You even see there are some slits in the back to allow for some of that heat to dissipate. So again, the angle is better for breathing. It uses bent birch plywood, which doesn't conduct heat for the most part. Slits to release heat. It's not noisy. I forgot about that. Compared to the sound of a wedding ring hitting the side of chrome, this is wood, so it's going to prevent those sounds. Arms are also easy to grip. They're wide, so you can just push yourself up, and there's no glare in terms of that reflection. So this is a great example then of an architect who really understands the needs of the client, in this case with medical issues. One more example here, in the pro side of my discussion here. Ron Koolhaas is the great Dutch architect. He is an intellect. He doesn't have a singular style because each project is going to be attuned to the needs of the client. So you can't say, oh, that's a Koolhaas look. They're all different because he's very keenly aware of the needs of the clients. He has obviously a group of people who work with him in the design team. This is the maison, the house at Bordeaux, maison at Bordeaux. And the client had a unique need. He had been in a car accident and was wheelchair bound. So he needed a fully accessible house. But at the same time, they didn't want to live in a house that was constantly reminding them that he has a disability. So that was another factor that Koolhaas had to consider. How do you create a house that is both accessible but doesn't look like it's designed for accessibility? How do we design or add on to houses traditionally if we want them to become accessible? What do we associate with accessible houses?
Ramps.
Yeah, ramps, railings, low one-story houses. And here's just really bad. I picked the worst example I could find on the internet, where when you approach this house, it just screams disability. The person here has a disability. And they didn't want that. They didn't want that to be, kind of shaping their lives. The client actually said to Koolhaas, he said, contrary to what you expect, I do not want a simple house. I don't want that little rancher. I want a complex house because the house will define my world. He realizes that he will be spending a lot of his time in the house. So why would he want a simple house that happens to have wide hallways and a ramp out front, when he could have something more complex that would feed the intellect and the soul to a certain degree? So the result is this fascinating building. It doesn't scream disability, it just screams cool, right? It's a contemporary house with industrial materials of steel and glass. It's cut into the side of a hill. It's overlooking the city of Bordeaux. He talked about this as 3 separate houses. The top house is where the parents and children would have their bedrooms. The middle section that you see here with the glass is for gathering of the family by day. And then the lower section holds the kitchen and the wine cellar. And as I said, it's dug into a hill. And here you can see the driveway wraps around so we can drop off members of the family. So strikingly beautiful, right? With these unusual angles, these portal windows, lots of glass and steel. Textiles play a really big role in this house. The curtains were designed, forgotten the textile designer, but they actually add a shimmering quality and they can wrap around an entire glass area. Cantilevered areas jutting out into space. And this is this shiny, fascinating elevator. So it does allow access to come up and down through that shiny elevator. Here it is jutting out over this hill. It's a very dramatic house, right? You don't look at it and think, oh, that's so nice, they found a house that meets the needs of the client. You don't even think about that, right? Where it gets interesting is here, though. Their solution to the problem was not to tack on an elevator at the end or a ramp, but to actually create an entire room for the father in his wheelchair, or he could convert to a desk, as you can see with a chair. The entire floor is run by a hydraulic lift here so that he can move from the lower house to the middle house to the upper house, as if the house is wrapping around him rather than he having to get himself up and down through some external ramp or elevator. It's really fascinating. Paul Goldberger is the architecture critic for the New Yorker magazine, and he said, Kohlhaas started with this, the client's needs, not with the form. So even though we have a strikingly new and exciting building, it wasn't that Kohlhaas said, oh, I want a building that looks like this and I'll throw in some ways for this guy to get around. No, the design was built around the needs of this client, and it just unfolded in a way that is exciting to us. Here you can see it laid out, this red, and you'll notice as well there's 3 stories of bookcases. So his floor, his room is moving upward with books behind that kind of create a warmth, I would say, and accessibility. So you can access all the books because you can go slowly up and grab what you want. Here, it is a private house, but I found a few pictures of what appear to be tourists in the house. But I've never been in it, and I frankly don't understand this house. But you can see here he's holding onto the controls, and he's below level at this point, but he can go up and mash. It is complicated and difficult to understand. He said, Kohlhaas, the designer, said, we interpreted the house as an extension of everything he could still do, rather than to compensate for everything he could no longer do. So they're kind of bursting the seams of the traditional life of somebody with a disability so that he can actually have a much richer life. It is a stunning building, very creative. And you'll see these portals up here. All of these are mechanized so that he can open and close windows through the use of this device. And there are those bookshelves. A movie was created about this. They shadowed the housekeeper for a day. And so she lived next door. And here she's taking advantage of this space to carry her buckets and her vacuum cleaners. Very slowly. There's also scenes of her dusting. So she dusts while it goes up. She quickly puts it, you know, she's going 3 stories up. But this is her job. She enjoys it. And now we're going to go on to the next level. You want to know if you can go faster, right? But no, it gets very slow to make sure it's safe.
My kids would have done something.
I don't want to think about it. I know.
I just can't even, yeah. I see
It's
doors
not for
driving
everyone.
off. Yeah.
Unfortunately, within 2 or 3 years after they built the structure, the father died. And so now you have the issue of a house that was built so specifically for the needs of the client that it's no longer necessary for future owners of the house. It's just complicated. Kohlhaas said that the elevator has become a monument to his absence. So the presence, they have belief that this individual is still there because the house was built around him. It will always be that way. What they've done since then is they've thrown some beanbag chairs and they've created sort of a family room area. But it is sad. So these are the 4 I started with because in each case it seems that the architect really listened to the needs of either a religious congregation or a very progressive family, tuberculosis patients, and then, of course, this individual in a wheelchair. But I want to look at a couple of examples where the architect kind of went on his own. And this is a house built for Dr. Edith Farnsworth. She was a nephrologist in Chicago, a single woman, something to consider, and she was looking for a weekend retreat outside of Chicago. It's been argued that because she was not typical of women of her generation, she was highly educated, she was 6 feet tall, and she was single, that she felt a need to escape the sort of societal standards of the day in Chicago. And this was going to be her weekend retreat located outside of Chicago by about an hour's drive near Plano, Illinois. She hired Mies van der Rohe, one of the most famous architects of the entire 20th century. Mies was best known as the last director of the Bauhaus, which was the great German design school. It was shut down in 1933 by the Nazis, who considered their teaching to be contrary to the proper teaching of young people, in that it encouraged a lot of independence and creativity, and that was something that was kind of threatening to Nazis. Mies was the last director. He stayed in Germany for several years after that, but he couldn't get clients and realized he too was threatened by the Nazis because the style of design he was doing, this modern look, was deemed not Germanic enough for Hitler, who had really strong opinions about architecture. So eventually, Mies had to flee Germany, and he came to the United States, to Chicago, where he worked, among other places, at the Illinois Institute of Technology, where they trained engineers and architecture students. But he wanted to have rich clients again. Mies could create beautiful, sumptuous buildings, but he needed wealthy patrons. And he didn't really know anybody in the United States at this point. So they're at a dinner party together, as the story goes. She's seated beside him. She's talking. He's sitting there mute. He doesn't even know if she understands English. She mentions that she has this property. Could he happen to recommend any architects? And so after a long dinner party, he turned to her and he said, "I could build your house," which was amazing for her. She had read about him. She was very keenly interested in modern architecture. And here she has the greatest living architect who said he'd build her a house. So it started out really well, and then it kind of took a dive at some point. Let's talk about the house before I get into the negatives, though. This is the Farnsworth house outside of Plano, Illinois. I don't know why I always give that address, because nobody knows where Plano is, and it's like a population of 500. But that's where it is, outside of. It's a suburb of Plano. It's along the Fox River, and as you can see, it is a glass house. Glass meaning all of the walls on the outer edges are made of glass. In 1945, nobody was doing this. Mies is the first, really. He would inspire Philip Johnson to build his own glass house, but this is the first example. It's kind of radical stuff. It's also very open in plan, and that's something that we seek now. You know, we always, if you look at real estate ads, they're always like, open plan, open kitchen. We like open, right? Well, of course, this is starting in this period, even earlier, Frank Lloyd Wright was advocating that as well. But completely open plan, except for the fact that there are 2 bathrooms, and you have privacy. And there's a partition wall between the kitchen and the living room. So this is the kitchen area. And then over top, you can see it doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, it's a partition wall. So in that sense, there are some dividers in the house, but otherwise it's completely open. 2 different platforms. This is the initial one. You climb several stairs to, I suppose it's like an outdoor patio. And then the second platform is the house itself. So we have a porch, an outdoor porch, and then this is the interior space. 8 columns support the house, and then 4 support the lower platform. So it's above ground, as you can see here. He designed it that way because, as you can see, that light color, that is the Fox River, and it does flood. So Mies incorporated that into his design and raised it above the ground. Smart guy, right? Not smart enough to anticipate what would happen. Also notice this grid system. Throughout the entire exterior and interior space, we have travertine blocks, 2-foot wide blocks, that create this insistent grid. Mies is trying to create a building that is perfect, ideal, mathematically correct, perfectly proportionate. So he's sticking to this grid, this insistent grid. And for some people, that could be a problem. He's been described as sort of a classical architect in the sense that, like the classical architects, anybody know where this is? Yeah, Nashville. It's Nashville's version of the actual Parthenon from ancient Greece, but that one's all crumbly, so I didn't want that. I wanted you to see a real, what it would have looked like. Mies is like a classical architect from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, in that he's trying to create a building of perfect proportions and harmony. So carefully placed columns that you see at the Parthenon, we find here with the carefully placed steel I-beams supporting the structure. It's according to a grid system, a modular system. So the idea is you would have a perfect building. All sounds great, right? Except if you have to live in the house. His adage was less is more. Get rid of the decorations. Get rid of the extraneous ornaments. I don't want a Victorian gingerbread house. I want something pure. Pare it down to the essence of the materials. Steel, glass, concrete. That's it. Don't add to it. Less is more. Could create something that is dazzling, right? And elegant, simplified, pure, honest. These are all words that we use to describe modern architecture. The exterior, you can see, sandblasted steel that's been painted with an enamel of white, so there you don't see any texture. It is utterly serene and perfect. And it has an elegant quality. There's something very striking about it. You have to walk along a dirt lane to get to it, and then you turn and you see this sort of floating, hovering white cube. It's very strange and very elegant at the same time. There's that insistent grid of the travertine. We climb the stairs, it's outside, and then it carries throughout the house. The story goes that when they delivered the travertine, which had been imported from Italy, because Mies likes high-quality stuff, and he doesn't care about cost overruns, apparently he sat in a chair, and the workmen would bring the samples by, and he'd either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and they would walk by with their travertine. Here you can see what that looks like. It's imperfect and irregular, but at the same time fairly neutral, and it became very popular for Mies' architecture as well as many other mid-century architects. Here it goes from the outside, through the glass, into the interior. So what are the problems and why did it go so wrong? First of all, we had radiant heat, which is wonderful, but in terms of cooling, no air conditioning at the time. Two operable windows that aren't that big, and then the door could open, but we're not talking about a lot of flow of air here. And we do have curtains, but it's been described as a real hot box in the summertime. So this was a serious problem. How about the placement of the furniture? When you have a grid system like this, Mies originally had designed furniture for the house. It was never built, partly because they had a falling out and issues over money. But he would have placed it, and these are examples of Miesian furniture. He would have placed things just so, because of course, this is the dining area, you all know, and this is the office area, you all know. And there's a sort of insistence about that idea that you would put everything exactly where it belongs. She said she used to have to hide the trash can, because it's like, well, where do you put a trash can? It doesn't fit, right? He didn't plan for that. I don't think he really plans for humans in some ways, if you think about it. This is Lakeshore Drive Apartments, another example of Miesian architecture in Chicago, and here's a great example of how neurotic he was. Either the shades had to be all the way up, or halfway shut, or all the way shut, but none of this in-between stuff. Can't do that. You can't have curtains of different colors. These are the sort of things that drive him crazy, right, as a designer. He wants total control, and he got that at the Farnsworth House. So she complained. She said, Mies talks about free space, the open plan, but his space is very fixed. I can't even put a clothes hanger in my house without considering how it affects everything from the outside. Because the house became famous immediately, and we had architecture students and just random tourists coming by and looking in the windows. She's feeling, as she says here, I'll get to that quote in a moment, she's feeling like a caged animal. So closet space, nope. I don't even know where it is. Do you know, David?
Oh, no.
I don't remember seeing a closet. It's all hidden.
It's in the trunk of her car.
That's right. Just don't bring extra clothes. They actually added a wardrobe. Mies was willing to effectively block off that space. She put it this way. He wanted it the other way, but she won. So that was something that was a compromise. More importantly, I think, for all of us, is you're not going to have privacy, right? Here's the bedroom, can't you tell? And here's the living room. And of course, they're connected. On the other side, we have, of course, glass, and then the kitchen, if you turn to the left. So really, in terms of privacy within the house, and then of course you're surrounded by glass and people are staring in at you. The question is, what's up with Farnsworth? Did she not know she was living in a glass house? Did he steer her wrong? Was he a fraud, as she claimed later? Did she not know what she wanted? And it was only after she started to live in it that she realized, oops, that's not a good idea to live in a glass house. It's not clear what happened, whether he changed the plans and didn't tell her. There was great animosity.
Weren't they lovers originally, though?
No.
Really?
I'm going to get to that in a minute, but that's a really good question. So on the one hand, lots of light coming in. You're in the middle of nature. She wanted to feel a part of nature. But on the other hand, you are on display. And she talked about that. I don't know where that quote is. She said, I felt like a prowling animal, always on the alert. I am always restless, like a caged animal at a zoo that everybody's walking past and looking at. She's, of course, above ground at this higher level, and it's all glass. And that's very frustrating. Yes, we have a partition wall, but that's not helping a lot. When you're cooking, you're completely on view to those outside. Now, she had a fair amount of property here, but people were curious. There's a bathroom, if you're wondering. One of two bathrooms. So we had the bathroom and we had the bedroom, clearly separate from the living room. So originally, the partition wall measured 5 feet high. And she said, that's not going to work. I'm 6 feet tall. So you're going to see my little head going back and forth. He wasn't really thinking about Edith, right? And then he insisted that she have 2 bathrooms. She said, why do I need 2 bathrooms? It's my weekend retreat. I'm not going to have a lot of visitors. He's like, no, you need 2 bathrooms because nobody wants to see Edith's nightgown. So there's a hint of a little misogyny here, that the male architect doesn't understand the needs of the female, doesn't want to see whatever you have in those women's bathrooms, right? So he pushed this through and insisted that she have this bathroom. He was willing to accommodate in some areas, but he wasn't really attuned to her personal needs, closet space, privacy, all these things. Now, cost overruns were the big problem. She originally said, I've got about $40,000. Later, she agreed to $60,000, and then it came in at a cost of $74,000 in 1951. That's pretty steep. He sues her because she wasn't paying. She countersues because she says he's a fraud and he didn't let her know what was going on. He won the suit, and basically she ended up having to pay. But this went very public, and it was very dirty. And I don't know if the reason was that she was trying to push her lawsuit in the public eye to help her cause. He told her, you go back to your nephritis where you belong and leave me to build your house without interference. He's a very arrogant, what we would call today a starchitect, right? He's a star, and he knows it. And so basically, the question is, did he take advantage of this woman? Did he take advantage of the fact that he was the stronger architect? He was an established star in the field, and she would just acquiesce to whatever he wanted. So she slings back here. We had an article in House Beautiful in 1953 in which Elizabeth Gordon talks about designers like Mies van der Rohe forcing their plans on their clients. And this is the famous quotation. She's talking about this. She talks about the house of Edith Farnsworth. She said, for if we can be sold on accepting dictators in matters of taste and how our houses are to be ordered, our minds are certainly well prepared to accept dictators in other departments of life. So we're talking the early 50s, right? The McCarthy era. They're looking at these architects as on akin to some sort of dictator, telling us how to live our lives. So you see, this well-developed movement of modern architecture has social implications because it affects the heart of our society, the home. So she became, in a sense, Farnsworth became like this victim in the public eye, this poor woman who was taken advantage of by this ruthless dictator. Or at least that's how it's playing out as part of her lawsuit, I would say. Notably, she owned the house for 21 years, and the only reason she sold it was because they put a highway in next to it, and suddenly it's a very noisy environment, and she lost, the desire to live there. So how bad was the house if she was willing to keep it for 21 years, right? Maybe it wasn't so bad, or maybe she was just proud to be a part of this history that she put up with it. I should bring you up to date. It has had problems with flooding. In 1996, one of the plate glass windows kind of popped out because of the force of the water. $250,000 in damage. I would say it's probably more than that because artwork kind of flowed out into the river. In 2007, the flooding made it all the way to the base of the building. This is the Fox River, and you can see this amazing photograph where they've tied up the curtains, and the furniture would have been damaged. It was her furniture, it wasn't museum furniture, but nevertheless. Today it's run by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and they have a plan to fix this problem, because flooding is only going to get worse with climate change and development. What do you think their plan is to fix the problem? What's that?
Raise it up.
Raise it up, still. They're going to create a hydraulic lift that will lift the house up, if I understand this correctly, and then lower it in periods where we don't have as much water. I mean, that's a lot of money. This house is considered that iconic that it is worth saving in this way. So we're not just going to raise it up permanently, we're going to raise it and lower it. But it is stunning, isn't it, with the water beneath it? Beautiful. There's going to be a movie, Maureen. Maggie Gyllenhaal has, I guess, the rights. Ralph Fiennes is going to play Neves. And I know that the story is going to play out that there was a romance. And certainly that's been something that art historians have dealt with over the years. The idea was that the reason for the falling out wasn't about money. It was that Farnsworth was in love with Mies, and it was an unrequited love, and she was, fighting back. I'm sure that's the movie version of it. You got to have love and romance, right? But the reality is art historians haven't discovered any evidence of this in the paperwork that exists to show that she actually had a relationship with him. But it makes her a really great story, and it kind of explains away the fact that she got a glass house, but she didn't like a glass house. So I'm really curious how this will play out. Hopefully it'll be filmed there, so if nothing else, you'll get to see the house. Here's Mies himself studying the model for the Farnsworth house that was exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art and really kind of, told the world about this exciting new house outside of Plano, Illinois. So my last building that I want to talk about, this is the one you're going to have, I'm going to hear some groans, I have a feeling. But work with me, it's fascinating. The clients, Richard and Suzanne Frank. Richard is a photographer, Suzanne is an architectural historian, and she works at the Institute of Architecture Studies for Peter Eisenman, this architect. This is a think tank, it's not an architectural firm. And Peter Eisenman, when they hired him, had only built a few buildings. He was sort of what we would call a paper architect, a theoretical architect who really hadn't had the opportunity to build because the theories were so wild. But she knew that. She worked for him. When they hired him, she knew what she was getting into. That's something to keep in mind. So they invited Peter Eisenman to their property in Connecticut. They said, we've got this old farmhouse. What would it cost to renovate it? And he said, I've got a better idea. If you let me raise that, I'll build you a new house for $30,000. And they jumped at the opportunity because this man was doing exciting things, at least on paper. And he built some structures that were very exciting, very complex. So they knew what they were getting into. They're not ignorant of that. First of all, let's talk about Eisenman and this definition of architecture. He's a theorist. So he says, architecture consists simultaneously of signification, function, and objecthood. Is that your definition of architecture? I don't know. So we start with the middle one because it's the easiest. Function, right? Architecture has a function. It protects us from the elements. It keeps us safe, right? That I get. Signification, that comes from the study of semiotics. The house is built in the early 1970s. Semiotics is very popular in literary criticism. And it's this issue of signification, symbolizing, communicating ideas. In this case, architecture can do more than just protect you. It can communicate and have meaning. Finally, objecthood, the idea that this is almost like a sculptural object. It's not just a roof over your head. It is in itself an object to contemplate, getting away from your traditional sense of what a building is. So, what does a house look like if you think back to when you were a child and you drew a picture of a house? Okay, I got it. The gabled roof, right? What else?
2 floors.
Square.
2 floors maybe, or something, yeah.
The little chimney on the top.
Little chimney with little smoke coming out.
Dog.
Little dog, that's always good. How about something like this? I vividly remember in kindergarten looking around at my classmates and thinking, why is everybody drawing the same house? I don't understand. How did they know? And every generation since then, that's how they've drawn a house, right? You have a gabled roof. I love that chimney, just like A prominent front door that tells you this is where you enter. Windows that look like windows, right? Little picket fence. So that's a traditional idea of a house. Eisenman, as a theorist, wants to completely destroy that. That is the mission of this house and his theory. What we end up with here is House 6. Notice it's titled House 6. He had a series of different numbered houses. So we're trying to kind of pull away from some sort of legacy or estate quality. House 6 was actually the second house that he started, but it took a while to complete it, so it ended up being House 6. This is the Frank house. We don't have the gabled roof with the chimney. We don't have a clear front door. I think it's over here. I don't know. We have windows that are opaque and windows that are clear, but that's not what a window should be. We have little slits in the side of it that aren't wide enough to walk through, but they're taller than traditional windows. And there's that front door again. It's sort of hovering above the ground. And there we can see these planes. What he's doing here is experimenting with the intersection of the 4 planes. So you can see the actual surface of the plane crossing through the house or avoid the absence of that presence in the wall all the way up into the ceiling. How those 4 planes intersect is what he's doing here. He's thinking of, first and foremost, about not the needs of the client, put it that way. It's a striking building, not like anything else before this, especially at night when lit up. I would love to visit this. It's a private home, and I don't know if they allow tourists or not. This is what he's trying to do here. He's trying to destabilize notions of home, room, sense of place. So you think you know what a house should be, right? No, we're gonna mix that up. Or what is a room? What should a room feel like? And what is the sense of place all about? He intentionally wants to destroy that. He talks about this house as speaking in universal terms that even Martians can understand. And I think it's a little tongue-in-cheek when he says that. I've seen the interview, and he's not smiling, but I'm hoping he was actually laughing inside when he said this, because that's a very peculiar statement. The point is that you don't need to come from a certain place and time or a certain location to understand what a house is. We're not going to cling to the old notions of a house. He's trying to create something much more universal, bigger than what we think of. So we go inside, and immediately you see something strange, right? On the left, we have this bright green staircase. It does, in fact, go to the 2nd floor. And on the right, we have this other staircase that's on the ceiling, bright red, hanging over the dining table. It's not a functional staircase. It has been argued that you could flip the house over, and then the red staircase would work, and the green staircase wouldn't. You know, we're playing intellectually. It's like a game almost. He talks about this as a stair transformation, transforming your notion of what a stair is, what it should look like, how it should function. Or here, columns. This is really irritating, I think. The family said they wanted to be able to seat 6 people. So Eisenman placed a column there, effectively allowing only 5 people. And that other person has to kind of look around the column. I got grown. I think somebody's going to groan. So he's transforming our experience of dining because we have to deal with this awkward column. He said these quote-unquote inappropriate forms have, according to the occupants of the house, the Franks, has changed the dining experience in a real and, importantly, unpredictable fashion. So, I have succeeded, right? You hate dinner because of me. Well, it's very strikingly beautiful. We don't have, you'll see here, no railings, and that makes life difficult. We also have, not surprisingly, columns that have no function whatsoever. So clusters of columns, some of them don't make it to the floor, some of them seem to be propping nothing up. But again, he's toying with us, playing with the notion of a traditional structure of a house. How about the kitchen? This one drives me crazy. The counters are set several inches below normal, and yet the cabinets start at 6 feet above the floor. Mrs. Frank had to use a step ladder often to access things. So constantly you're in this situation where your experience with the kitchen and cooking has been transformed, right? He's making you experience that this way.
Yeah, I'm not cooking anymore.
I don't want to cook. Take out. I love this photograph. It's like, yeah, beautiful opportunity for a picture window looking out into nature is, you know, completely destroyed. We do, however, have this strange slit. Not wide enough to exit the house, it's not a doorway, and it's not a traditional window width either. If you'll notice, that void continues up into the ceiling, where above we have a bedroom. So, Mr. and Mrs. Frank can't sleep in the same bed because there's a slit in the I'm not trying to make this funny. Oh, serious. So we have a plexiglass panel here. If you're upstairs, you can look down to the people here, and they can look up and wave to you. But it's all about that insistent play with the grid and the floating planes, if you will. Eventually, when they renovated the house, he begrudgingly allowed them to build this sort of bridge bed. You still see the plexiglass, but you know, it's okay, you can sleep together now. But again, kind of shaking up the notion of how we relate to one another at night in bed. Here, another factor that's annoying. To get to the bathroom here, you have to go up the stairs, in through the bedroom, and then through the dressing room, and this tiny little sink in a closet, and then we have the bath here. So if you have guests over, it's a little awkward. They had a daughter. I don't really understand where the daughter would spend her time. Should I mention? I didn't mention, this is a weekend retreat. That's something to keep in mind. It doesn't have to service 365 days a year. So I give him a little break there. Okay, why did he ignore the needs of the client? He said it was to shake them out of those needs. That's the point. Think about it, we're in the 1970s. We are rebelling against tradition, particularly the tradition of modern architecture. We're trying to create something that's challenging and new. And I think he succeeded in that sense. He called himself sort of a deconstructivist, a term that was thrown around in this period of exhibitions where you're deconstructing the idea of house and deconstructing the building itself. He also talked about it as being post-functional. We don't need functional houses. We're beyond that, right? And he said, my best work is without purpose. I invent purpose afterward. Who cares about function? And then he said, my favorite, that is the reduction of architecture to mindless convenience. So when you want your nice little kitchen and your dining room with 6 chairs, well, that's just a sign of your mindless convenience. Suzanne Frank wrote about this in 1994. They published a book with a series of essays by critics and architectural historians, and she wrote about what it was like. What's interesting is that she was willing to talk about the things that bother her. Yeah, it's frustrating to use the kitchen. Yeah, that table thing with the column. Yeah, it's annoying. And the bedroom. But she praised the house. She and her husband both really were defensive about it. The house, the biggest problem with the house was that it was really poorly constructed, and almost immediately it was leaking like a sieve. They had to completely rebuild the entire house several years later. The Franks claimed it wasn't Peter Eisenman's fault. It was the contractor's fault. But you have to wonder if the plans were so strange and so unusual that the contractor couldn't quite figure it out. And I would think that Peter Eisman had something to do with this problem. But in this essay, she talked about the negative things, but ultimately they said, this is a great house. In fact, they kept this house from the 1970s until 2013. They listed it, and it took several years to sell, but eventually in 2016 it did sell. That goes to show that it meant something to them. In fact, Richard Frank said, we can't sell this house because much as we are annoyed by it, it's part of who we are now. It's helped to shape their relationship at night, right? It shaped who they were, their identity, and so they couldn't part with the house. Even though, as you mentioned, their daughter, their daughter hated the house, and they couldn't get her to come home to visit, so they actually ended up renovating another structure on the property so she would come home. With that table, that dining room table. It's the table. Finally, I mentioned Michael Cullen, the writer about, you've probably read his essays on environmental issues, veganism. He's their neighbor, and he was able to spend the night with his wife and his son at the house. And they wrote this amazing article for House and Garden, which just cracks me up, because this is not about some architectural critic coming in and saying this is a great, iconic house. This is a guy who's like, what is with this house? So his wife apparently hated it. She said it looks like some teenage boy built it. Look at me, look at me. And then the son, who was 4 years old at the time, he's like, so why is there a staircase on the ceiling? And his father gave him this great little theoretical reason. And he's like,
so why is there a staircase on the ceiling? And then the next morning he comes out and he says, so why is there a staircase on the ceiling? So it just goes to show that it depends on who you are and what your background is, how you approach this house. It is something they loved, and it's greatly admired in architectural history, but obviously the client's needs were not necessarily met. So here we are, all the houses we've talked about. In the case of a progressive religious faith, we need a space that would meet their specific beliefs. The Schroeder House, a progressive woman wanting to raise her children in an unusual way. The Pineau Clinic, where we are tuned to the needs of tuberculosis patients. Or here at the House of Bordeaux, a house that meets the needs of a family with disability. And then finally, the last two, where the architects kind of decided they wanted to do things their own way. The results, nevertheless, are quite amazing, all of these buildings. And I hope that if you ever have an opportunity to build a house, that you will know what it is you want, that you will tell your architect very clearly what you want, but that you will also let your architect have a little bit of fun and creativity, because you may end up with something like one of these. Thank you.